as a transshipment point for illicit or illegal drugs from South America by the U.S. Department of State. In 2022, the British High Commission also revealed that Ghana had been identified as a transit country for drug trafficking. Well, that tag, though, hasn't always dominated the news. The perception of links to political figures and some level of systemic failure when it comes to the drugs trade, whether intentional or a real challenge, has always got people talking. So in March 2025 alone, for instance, the Narcotics Control Commission had two major drug busts, $20 million worth of opioid and $350 million worth of cocaine. Now, exactly 19 years ago, on the 21st of April 2006, when that famous 77 parcels of cocaine issue came up and a committee was set up with various recommendations, many thought that it was the beginning of dealing with this problem. But we're still here with challenges. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Agenda. My name is Beatrice Adu, and tonight we are delving into this issue. Have we really had problems, or we have just had rhetorics as solution? I do have on the panel with me Mr. Kwesi Sapong. He is former NACOC boss. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Agenda once again.
To all your viewers, good evening.
I also do have with us Mr. Emmanuel Bobade. He is former UN Senior Mediation Advisor and also former Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you as well for joining us on Agenda tonight.
Good evening, and good evening to all your viewers.
And of course, I do have on my left side Francis Opoku-Amua. He's Acting Director, Public Affairs and International Relations with the Narcotics Control Commission. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us as well.
Yeah, good evening, and we're happy to be here.
Remember that we're streaming live on 3FM 92.7. Send us your comment and we will read them back to you. I want to start with you, Mr. Kwesi Sapong, because you were the boss of NACOC just shortly after that major drug bust from 2009. And there have been a number of fact-finding committees with recommendations, etc. Are we in a good place from where you sit?
Well, thank you very much. It's a question that continues to be raised both in the public domain and among the international community, and especially the intelligence community. I would, first of all, like to, or let me put this, I would like to address the issue from policy perspectives. And what has been lacking in all these fact-finding is the lack of discussion on the debilitating security paradoxes that face transnational organized crime.
What do you mean by that?
There are a number of failures. There are security paradoxes that they are security failures. The first one is the failure associated with ineffective international legislation. Because we bust the drugs, we are members of the UN, we have signed to the charters, the three major drug treaties, or the drug framework. And so we are bound by international treaties to embark on law enforcement strategies. But I think that looking at the drug trade, it doesn't start from here at all. If you take cocaine, if you take heroin, it doesn't start from here. Heroin is either from Mexico or from the Far East, from the Golden Triangle. Cocaine, basically from Latin America. Other synthetic drugs, either Europe or America. So, when we bust the drugs here, is there enough legal framework internationally for us to deal with the whole chain from producer to busting?
But why are you shifting into the international community? Because we must, the country must have responsibility. It seems you're absolving the country of any responsibility at all.
I did say that we are members of the international community. And therefore, one would expect that when we ask for support in identifying those in the chain, we get that support. When I was in NACOP, there were a number of times we busted people and we sought for support. The support didn't come. Whereas when we bust people and they are needed in other countries, we are quick to give them up.
So that's one side of the story.
Well, that is, we have busted them. Internationally, people are looking for them. We give them up. When our people are busted and we want them, they say no, let them finish their term.
So what about the other side, before I go to the other panel members to get their preliminary comments? What about the other scenarios when it seems officials in the country failed to ensure that the right things were done before the drugs were even moved from Ghana to other countries? And an example is in 2012, when you were actually angry about the fact that your own men and the systems had failed you, and you were thinking of resigning because there were 2 drug busts in Heathrow in UK.
Yes.
So that was within your parameters.
Yeah, it was within my parameters, but those who were involved, we dealt with them. You see, we dealt with them. In fact, one even didn't want to be dealt with at all. He just resigned and disappeared. On another occasion, we sacked about 8 people, right? We took them through disciplinary measures, we sacked them, but somehow they were not prosecuted properly. And when I left, for want of prosecution, at least one of them came back to NACOP. And it's now in NACOP. Because the prosecution didn't go through.
So we awarded a criminal, that's what you're saying?
Well, if he was not prosecuted, I cannot say he was a criminal. We tried him. As far as I remember, the chairman of my board was a member of the... He admitted. And yet, he was bold enough, or some of them were bold enough to go to court.
Who was that? Do you want
No,
to
I don't want to mention names, because like I'm saying, if he was not found guilty by a court of competent jurisdiction for want of prosecution, it will not be fair for me to mention.
And he's still occupying a position at NACOC, that's what you're saying?
He's been taken back in NACOC because that is his legal right. That's what I'm saying, that it is a failure of associated with the legal regimes, both in Ghana and elsewhere.
Let me get a clear understanding again. I asked the direct question of whether or not we're in a good place. You've given us the problem about a failure of the system. So as we have it now...
We are in an improving place. I mean, we are in an improving place. I said, we are rest. All right. The recent 2 busts, I give kudos to the law enforcement community, intelligence and law enforcement community. But we will have to look again, observe, watch. And now there are many more critical voices. At each stage, those who did the arrest must tell us what is happening. It's very, very important.
They must tell us what is happening. And I'm coming to you, Mr. Opoku-Amoah. You're with NACOC now. Just paint a picture for us what the situation is. Mr. Beatrice Adu is telling us that we are in an improving state, as it were. What is your own assessment of where we are? Because per the news stories, it doesn't look like that is entirely the case.
No, I thank you so much for the opportunity, and also to share the same platform with Mr. Beatrice Adu, who was once my boss, and also Mr. Bombadi, who is renowned for the things he does. I think that I would want to say that I would want to agree with him and say that, yes, we're improving, because we started from somewhere. We started with the PNDC Law 236. We worked with the PNDC Law 236 and moved on to the Narcotics Control Commission Act, Act 1019, Act 2020. And there's gradually a shift from where we started from. We started at a place where every person who was using drug was seen as a criminal. We started at a point where when you use drug, there is a description for you. But now the new law is telling us that people who are using drugs are not criminals. They are people who are sick, and therefore there is a need for us to see them as people who need help.
I hope you do understand that the conversation is not just about those who use drugs,
Yeah,
but those who bring them in and are into the business.
I'm just moving from where we were, and that is why I want to agree with him to a point, because we started from somewhere. We started from the 236. Act 1019 is working. Within the Act 1019, it's treating a category of people as people who need help and therefore must be treated. And when it comes to trafficking, it is still there. The punishment is still there. The punishment says that if you do it, you go to jail. Minimum 10 years, maximum 25 years. So we can say that in terms of gradually improving upon our laws, we're doing better.
The punishment is there. Aside
Yes.
from the MV Benjamin case, where 2 individuals were given 15 years in jail, 2 years later they were released. Are you able to name people that you have successfully prosecuted with the law you're quoting?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Even as we're talking, currently there are people who are standing trial. Currently, we have about 25 people between 2023 and 2024 who have been successfully prosecuted and are serving jail terms. Various people, various nationalities.
What category of individuals are those?
Because like I said earlier, if you're using, now the law says that there is a window of opportunity for you where you can be directed to go to rehab center. But where you're trafficking, the law says that the law must deal with you. And therefore, the law is still dealing with people who are trafficking. And people who are using, the law is saying that treats them. So for me, we've moved from a point to where we are now, saying that we need to go hard on people who are trafficking because they are causing a lot of harm to our country, to our young people, and therefore there's a need for us to deal hard with them. But people who are using, then the law says that you have to treat them because they are in a kind of a disease or a sickness.
You say we need to go hard, and I'll be coming to you very shortly, Mr. Bombadi. We need to go hard. Is that a subtle admission that in as much as you say that we are improving, you still do not think that we've been hard enough on people who have been trafficking drugs?
No, we have. Once the law catches up with you, the law deals with you.
So, again, you say that you agree with Mr. Kwesi Sarpong as regards the improving state.
Yes.
In June 2024, 6.48 million worth of cocaine seized at Kotoka International Airport. You're yet to tell us whether anybody, a prime suspect, was prosecuted in this. In 2016, Ghana was ranked 3rd cocaine transit point in Africa. Also, West Africa key transit hub for illicit drug. That was in 2023 by the World Drug Report. When I was talking earlier, I talked about the fact that in 2009, the U.S. Department of State declared Ghana as well as a transshipment point. And I also talked about the British High Commission, that revelation coming from all these institutions or agencies. How do you see this and still say that we are in an improving state, as in agreeing with Mr. Kwesi Sarpong?
Yeah, because all these things that you've enumerated, at each point in time, people will be dealt with, or people were dealt with. And like what Mr. Kwesi Sarpong said, that if at any point in time people go through the process, as in the law court, and one way or the other, they are acquitted and discharged, that will not come to the Narcotics Control Commission as we doing it, because the people would have gone through proper law process, and therefore the law would either deal with them when they are found guilty. Because once you're arrested, at each point in time, you are a suspect until you're proven guilty that, yes, this charge that has been leveled against you, really, you've committed that offense, and the law will deal with you. So for me, I think that the law is there, the law is working. At each point in time, it depends on who is applying it. What I mean is that if we go to court, fortunately, Mr. Kwesi Sarpong is a lawyer, and once you go to court to argue your point, your case. And if you're able to argue your case, there are people, as in judges, who will listen to you and say that, yes, you are at fault or you are not. So all the cases that you've enumerated, yes, It happened. At the end of the day, they went through due process. And those who were acquitted and discharged were there. Those who were sent to prisons were also there.
Mr. Bombardier, I'm coming to you now. I know you've heard Mr. Kwesi Sarpong as well as Mr. Opoku-Amoah giving their own understanding of really what the situation is. You've been in this international space for decades. Yeah, for decades. Indeed, Mr. Kwesi Sarpong talked about international failure, as it were. But don't you think that locally as well, we haven't done what we are supposed to do to ensure that we make drug trafficking punitive enough?
Thank you so much for putting this together, and my due respects to our doyen here, Kwesi Sarpong, and my good friend Opoku-Amoah. First of all, if you were to give me 30 minutes to make a preliminary observation and directly deal with your question, you are hosting a very important issue that the whole of Ghana must appreciate. Why am I saying this? So I want to quickly add on, because Mr. Amoah talked about the debilitating effect on our human person. But keep in mind that because of the organized crime nature of drug trafficking, it can completely destroy the democracy we are building up to the point we are, because that money can buy political parties off. It can corrupt elections. It can corrupt institutions. And I'll add on to that how, when you started mentioning the dates, the years, because of my frequent travel, as you have noted, I travel a lot through Schiphol Airport. When you are entering Schiphol Airport, 5:30 or 6 a.m., the Ghanaian plane or the plane that comes from Accra is met with these sniffer dogs. Very undignifying. But we cannot say anything because we have created a situation in which that is how we are met.
And it is for the Ghanaian airplane?
Yes,
specifically.
It is. Yeah, because when you look at the entry points of passengers disembarking, you don't see the same being applied to the other areas. It is the flights that are landing from Ghana. You are met with these sniffer dogs. Some people freeze. Should you keep walking with your bag, or do you stay for the dog to sniff you all around? That is the level of human indignity we've suffered.
When was the last time you experienced that?
So this would be probably in the last, going back into the last 6 years. Then it started to fade off. And I've already gone 3 times through Europe, through the same airport. I don't see that again. Why do I say this? It is to respond to your question. And to say that the menace that is a threat to us, we must take the lead in doing everything to be robust and effective. And that's basically where I want to come with you and agree with you. And how do we do that? We do it by strengthening our legal frameworks and making it so airtight that there can be no escape route. But if you remember, Kwesi Sarpong started by talking about the policy space. What does the policy space suggest? This is one area we need a multi-partisan or a bipartisan unity and sense of purpose, and never to argue about it from a political perspective. And when we do that, we make the laws and regulations to be so robust, but also to be consistently enforced and to align with international standards. Now, if you wanted to underline with international standard, my second point is nothing prevents us from pushing for the type of international cooperation with our voices to demand more strenuous efforts. And we need to start it diplomatically in how we want to see the cooperation happening. How do we want to see intelligence sharing? We can do it in our own multilateral space.
But intelligence sharing, as far back as, again, I'm referring to MV, if you check the reports that was shared by Georgina Theodore-Wood, the committee said that NACOC had information in good time to be able to act.
Yes.
So you had information.
Yes. So thanks for that clarification, because when you are trying to promote international cooperation, but you are not robust enough in your own local jurisdiction in terms of the effectiveness, the consistency, the application of the rule of law to hold criminals who are organized criminal traffickers, your international cooperation might not be effective because at the local level, you are not doing enough. And that's why you can get the alert from the intelligence, but if your weaknesses in prosecution are so porous, as you suggested in one of your comments, somebody who's jailed for 15 years is released after 2 years. Now, that for me is a grave sin to the people of Ghana, because you are destroying an entire future by being lenient in the application of the law. And once you are lenient in the application of the law, it's not just what Amwa said in terms of the destruction of the human person, but it is the country that is being destroyed. And this is why it must be dealt with all the level of seriousness.
So you're blaming the judiciary. You think that our legal system is perhaps too porous, is not able to deal with issues as they should. That's what you're saying.
So I'll put it together. Law enforcement, which includes the judiciary.
Criminal justice system.
All the
criminal justice system.
The criminal justice system. But let me be bold enough to add, and Ghana, you know, we are too respectful, we don't say those things. There is political interference in how these people are giving leniency. Why do we want to run away from it? And that's what I'm saying.
What issue, for instance, do you know where there was clear political connections? I mean, we've heard people say that political representatives accusing the other party of being filled with drug barons and all of that.
You see, somebody serves 8 years in jail in the United States. The person comes back, arrives in his hometown, his party supporters meet him with jubilation. His party comes into power, he's given responsibility, as if to say, we don't even recognize that you are a convict. Subtly, that is the tolerance at the political level that says, if you are wealthy and rich because you have traded in drugs, it doesn't matter.
And it cuts across all the political parties in Ghana.
It cuts across politics. And that's why I started by saying that the robustness requires that the policy space is expunged from the political mischievousness that accompanies the discourse. So that you are not scoring a political point, but trying to see the other as the one at fault. Because if the other is at fault, it affects all of us. It doesn't matter who is at fault. It affects all of us. And that is the point that I am emphasizing.
So what would you say to those who would argue that if you're in power, we expect that when something happens, you deal with it. So if you don't deal with it and you're supposedly lenient, and the other person is accusing you of being too lenient and therefore supporting these, you think that that is over-politicization of the issue?
No. Deal with it, because the whole idea about being the primary duty bearer is to deal with it. Because when you're talking about the enforcement that we are talking about and all the criminalities, it comes back to decisions that are political. But I would want, beyond dealing with it, the demeanor, the level of assertiveness, the language of the articulation of how to deal with it is also important. That's why, was it last week when was it last week or the week before when President John Mahama talked about we will be so ruthless in dealing with
zero
crimes.
Tolerance for drug trafficking.
Exactly. So I want to see our leaders talk about this every time they have the opportunity. You see, when you are quiet, people might think you are not dealing with it, even if you are dealing with it. So deal with it, I agree with you, but particularly at the level of the highest principal of the land, the president, when he gets the opportunity, as he did, you declare the zero tolerance and let Ghanaians see that you mean business when you talk about dealing with crime, and increase the international cooperation, but reinforce what I call our local capacities to deal with criminality. So
you talk about dealing, and I'll come to you again, Mr. Kwesi Sapon, very shortly before I come back to you, Mr. Amwa. You talk about dealing with it at the highest level. And again, not to just single out the MV Benjamin case, but the fact that you're aware that there were even some police officers who were involved, senior police officer involved, at a point was recalled, and we still see some of those individuals even in government. How do you deal with that? Yes, and that is why, again, thank you for reminding me, because you sent me back to the policy space that Kwesi Sapon talked about, and I further clarified on that to talk about policy is led by the government of the day, and the formulation of policy requires that robustness. So you are absolutely right. By virtue of the fact that
people have been found, whether they are police officers or other officers, and they are still there. What does it say? It speaks of tolerance and it speaks of impunity. That as long as my party is in power, I can get away with it. And that is why, when at the highest level, the emphasis continuously repeats the zero tolerance, and people are seen to be dealt with, then it begins to clean the drug menace in our country.
So would you by this say that, for instance, and Mr. Kwesi Sapon also mentioned earlier, that during his time, somebody who was tried is still at NACOC right now. Would you say that perhaps the current government goes back to any individual who was involved in such and begin to probe the matters again, so that if perhaps they were not looked at properly this time around, there would be that leadership, the show of leadership that you're talking about right now?
I would absolutely go for that. I will support that idea. And you know why? Because it's also about credibility. You see, when you are fighting organized crime, particularly related to drugs and criminality, your attitude and your response capacities speak to the rest of the world about how you are dealing with it. And that's why it is very dangerous, because the opposite of it, when you are not seen to be so rigorous, that is then how you begin to earn the name tag of a narco state. And when you begin to earn that name tag, I don't like the word blackmail because it describes our color. That is the negative effect. But what it does is to make us not to be part of this international community with our human dignity and our human rights. And that is why it's above partisan politics, though the decisions are undertaken by the government in office, which in a way is also about political competition. But because drug trafficking brings millions and millions of money, it can paralyze even decision-making processes. And to that extent, I fully now appreciate even further why this evening's conversation is so important. And it is so important, we must rise above this. You describe it as a rhetoric. I even go beyond that to call it a mischief, so that the national interest is served, the interest of the Ghanaian people is served, and that our children and their children can travel like anybody in this world and not be seen to be Ghanaians because they hold Ghanaian passports, to be dented in their image and in their dignity.
I want to come to you, Mr. Kwesi Sapon. How do we deal with the inefficiencies in the system? Because I'm sure, again, you remember that about the cocaine which turned into baking soda, which led to the interdiction of a police officer who was later reinstated and all of that. That cocaine, or that substance, had already been tested earlier. I think it was in 2009. And then in 2011, when they went to court and they wanted to test the exhibit, it was seen as a baking powder. How do we deal with the inefficiencies in the system?
Well, you see, when I started, I wanted to talk about a number of, because you see, there are failures associated with the whole transnational organized system. That is what I was trying to arrive at. Including, for example, failures associated with half-hearted national sanctions. Those also associated with conflicted mass public outcry. There are also those that are associated with overzealous coercion. In other words, when you make, let me give an example. We have made a bust at, what is it called? Somewhere on the way from, somewhere in the, between Cape, Takrady and Cape Coast.
You're talking about the recent one?
Yes. So,
there were $350 million
what is important is that there was a bust. You know, if I want to come to that. The immediate response is for us to be prepared to take political credits, and the media overzealously begin to publicize this thing. It doesn't work that way. We need to give space to intelligence community to do a more thorough work. And that is why this conversation will come every time. Because when there's a bust and we are not careful, people will take credit, people will attack. What is important is, what do we do with all that? This guy who was released from the US and came back, We met him at the airport and brought him to our office and told him that he ought to be reporting to office every 2 weeks. He was doing it up to a certain time. He failed to do it. Continue. But there is evidence in my office today which shows that the people he was with. I was therefore surprised clearly when he was given some responsibility after his political party came to power. I'm not saying that they are politically, but that is exactly it. It is about overzealousness. We are overzealous to take credit. We are overzealous to protect our people. Because that heroine that went to the US, we need, like you rightly asked my brother Bombardier, we need to go back to where we have failed, where something was missing. It's very important. Maybe the intelligence community of people who served under MPP, served under NDC, need to be put together. And we should look at each case one by one. Do we have an intelligence network database of all those involved in drugs? Is it possible? It ought to be possible.
You're calling for that.
Yeah, I mean, that is what, the information is there. But have we networked it? You see, because before, in December, 8 seamen, December 2024, 8 seamen were recruited by Colombians to go and man a ship in Colombia. They were arrested in the Caribbean seas by the French army. The information got to NACOP. When we asked them to give, it was then during the transition, when we asked them to give us, to get the people and hand them over to us, they told us that they cannot, the Colombians have said, the drugs belong to them, so they cannot hold the Ghanaians. And they released the Ghanaians. And the Ghanaians allegedly came back to Ghana. NACOP was appropriately briefed, and they got the guys, interviewed them. But you see, this is where the thing is. If those guys if we had arrested French guys here and said it was the Ghanaians said that they are responsible for the drugs, the French will not be happy.
Do I take it that you don't completely accept the narration of the French government that indeed those people, the Colombians said...
It's not a French government.
The French force that took those...
the French force, it was in the Caribbean,
that took those individuals, yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You do not accept their explanation. You think that, I mean, they should have still, even if they didn't find any evidence, quote unquote, based on what the Colombians told them, they should have still helped you with prosecuting those individuals.
No, not necessarily prosecuting them. Bringing them over so that our people can go. You don't release them. You bring them over. There's a way in which they could have brought them over here. Our people would have held them and taken them through the proper screening, debriefing and all that. That is one. The other thing is that there is what I'll call...
You call it half-hearted?
Half-hearted approaches by national governments.
Tell us, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that when something is purely intelligence, for goodness sake, let high-profile politicians shut up on the issue. It may have political significance, but look, we need to sit down and say that the people we are paying for a job, let them do the job thoroughly from beginning to end. They haven't, no intelligence community anywhere in the world will ask for support from governments and from the politicians to comment on their work and either applaud or criticize. That's none of our business. Our business is to ensure that we are put there not because, and very interesting, the arrests that were made in 2025 are by people, many of whom were recruited either in the MPP regime or NDC regime. So those, when people are in law enforcement and intelligence, there is no barrier, political barrier to them. They work as if they have been recruited by the nation states. And that is extremely important. We need to give them that. The other thing is that the next thing I would like to mention is the need. You see, now that these busts have been made, the natural consequence of those dark logicians, the transnational organized guys, is to target the people who did the arrest. Not to kill them, but to corrupt them. Very, very important.
Did you have that experience when you were there as NACOC boss?
Oh, several times. Many of them came, many of them mentioned, but even let me mention about this. You know, about what Amwa said. Somebody was arrested and jailed in June 2024. The person's name came up on a list of people who were to be released, given presidential pardon in December. And NACOC kicked against it. I said, no. The president cannot do this. This guy was just jailed in June 2024. So it means that there are people who, like the politics is talking about, somebody knew, and yet somebody added his name. And in my case, there were several people came up. Do this, you do this, you do this. Some people even came to tell me that why are we arresting people who smuggle cocaine out of the country? That's not. If they bring it in, we should smuggle. We should arrest. But if we didn't arrest them and they are sending it out, all the better for us. You know. So there are the discussion. You are giving us only 1 hour, you know. But this is such an important discussion that you need a 3 hour, maybe with different people. One segment for 1 hour, another group of people for another 1 hour, because the challenges, for example, even the policy implications for drug trafficking can take 2 hours. You know, what are the security challenges for drug trafficking? It takes 2 hours. Because the amount of money out there, and like I'm saying, it is not just about drug trafficking, my dear. It is about transnational organized crime. Those in the drug business may very well be in the gold galamsey business. That is transnational organized crime. It is organized. And we have heard, I don't know, but we heard that some foreigners who are armed, I don't know whether they are armed groups, but some foreigners who are armed are there, are in the forests.
But that is an obvious information that we all do have.
Yeah, but is it being followed up by the intelligence community? That is the point.
So it means that, again, you're admitting that we are not, in as much as the international...
half-hearted. I've indicated.
Yes.
National half-hearted approaches. And we need to take each issue and face it square on.
So would you say that we are just talking, we know what to do in terms of dealing with the problem, but we're just seeing the distraction happening because we are not fully committed to this fight?
Okay, now, His Excellency the President has said that he will leave no stone unturned to deal with what? Drug trafficking. My plea with him is that it should not just be drug trafficking. Transnational organized crime. And now that he said it, he must be ready to be held to his word. And those to hold him to his word, it ought not to be the MPP people. It ought to be the NDC people. Because he's our leader. We need to hold him to his word.
Why MPP people, are they not Ghanaians?
They are Ghanaians, but people would think that they are playing politics. When we do that, we are not playing politics. We are saying that our leader has said this, and that is what he needs to do, so that we have the moral courage when we are not in power in another how many years, you know, we can still, or those who are heirs to us in the party can still say, this is what we did in the past. We are now, even though we're out of power, we still hold the government on.
And that should include, and I'm coming to you very shortly, Mr. Opoku-Amoah, that should include the proposal that was made earlier about the need to look into all issues where certain individuals who are currently in government, including police officers, are called and the cases are re-examined. That should include that.
I don't have a problem with that. Not only should that include that, but even if they were involved and they have retired and they are on some, benefits that are lumped, I don't see why, what is the word you call it? Impeached. I don't see why only a president can be impeached. a senior public servant who is benefiting from largesse of crime, particularly transnational organized crime, when he's investigated and he's found to be, he ought to be impeached. In other words, taking off that largesse. For me, that is extremely important.
And that should include confiscation of property suspected to be tainted, because that's normally what happens with individuals.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have my own attitude to that. If he can pay money, right? You're going to seize a $4 million property. Who do you give it to? You're going to auction it. You get the same politicians to auction it for $200,000 when it's $4 million. Let the man pay the $4 million. Because how are you going to cope up with that $4 million? So, yes, we need. What are we going to do with the $4 million property? Intrasaco, for example. What are we going to do with it? You sell it to whom? Nobody buys it and it crumbles? No.
Let me come to you, Mr. Opokwama. What did you have to say?
Yeah, I just want to side with them. But one very important thing that they've all have said is dealing with the issue. I think that, and it comes with a lot of political will. If we have that, and if we're able to deal with the issues irrespective of who is involved, then at the end of the day, we can't be making a lot of progress. But if it depends on who is involved and how the person is treated, then obviously we will not be able to deal with the issues the way we should deal according to the laws that govern the transnational organized crime. And let me quickly also say that I think we have been referring to a narco officer who has come back and who is working.
Mr. Kwesi Sarpong mentioned it, yes.
Mr. Kwesi Sarpong mentioned, and I'm happy that he also mentioned the fact that that officer went through due process. Yeah, if you go through due process and at the end of the day you come out unscathed, we cannot be referring to the person as somebody probably who has done something wrong.
But again, that should point to the kind of evidence that you send for prosecution to use.
Definitely.
So if you don't send good evidence, there's no way AG can...
That will not come from the Narcotics Control Commission. It comes from the prosecution. So it depends on what kind of information and what kind of docket you send to the AG. So if the person goes through every process, because like you mentioned, it wasn't just one person. There were a group of people, and that person went through due process and came back. I don't think that we can tag that person and say that that person has come back and therefore we need to reinvestigate or do something about it. I am all for it if people do wrong, irrespective of who they are, irrespective of what party they belong to. Once they've committed a crime, we have to deal with them according to the law. And that is my position, and that is the point that I want to make. So that we don't put it at the back of our minds that NACOC is harboring people who have done wrong and nothing was done to them and they are still working. At the end of the day, they went through due process, and I'm happy he is a very good lawyer. And he knows that those people, and especially that person he's referring to, went through due process, and he was cleared.
Again, so do I hear you say that you think that from the perspective of NACOC, you do everything you have to do, and at the end of the day, you leave it to the other agency. If they are not able to pass through and prosecute the individuals, well, you did your bit. But no, if you're really interested in dealing with the problem, there should be a level of collaboration where even if you've done your part, you still want to follow through with the others to ensure that they get to the end of it.
That is exactly what we do. I think during his time, he introduced something that the interagency committees. And when you look into our law, and I'm happy is here, our law is based, the composition of the board. It's institutional based. And what it means is that we are supposed to collaborate and work together with all the intelligence institutions in the country. And therefore, for us, we are always interested. We are always in for collaboration, because that is what the law says, that we should collaborate with relevant state institutions to make sure that we deal with drug trafficking. And that is what we do. So at the end of the day, whatever we do, we are interested to see the end result, because as we are all saying, in every prosecution, the end result is conviction, that you'll be able to convict people who do wrong. And for NACOC, that is what we do. We are ready for collaboration, and it's something that we're noted for. We collaborate internationally, and we do that locally as well. So for me, we are interested in whatever collaboration, and we make sure that whatever the issues are, and as far as we are concerned, we do our bit, and like Riley said, we collaborate to see the end of it. That is why I am saying that even to our own officer, and I'm happy that he is here and he initiated that, because he felt that no, the person has done wrong, but the person has to go through due process. And we made sure that we went through due process and that person is out. But the thing that let me stress is that I think we all have agreed that there is a need for us as a country to deal with the issue of drug trafficking, irrespective of who is involved. Once the person has committed a crime, then we need to deal with it. If we don't do that and we are dealing with people according to the color of the cloth they are wearing, then obviously we are going to have issues.
I want to come to you very shortly, Mr. Bombande, but there are some comments coming in from our viewers. This is coming from Kwame Nikwe says the thing about he says the thing is a national problem, and we all need to come together to deal with it. There's also another comment that is similar to what Kwame just told us, and this is coming from Abusa Jackson Gilanyo. He says, Auntie B, good evening to you and your team. The drugs problem in Ghana is causing a lot of havoc in this country. It's not only NACOC's job. Everybody has to support NACOC and police fight this canker. Drugs use in this country contribute to a lot of basic crime. A number of other comments coming through as well. But I want to come to you, Mr. Bombande, and perhaps you could add your concluding thoughts as well, just for us to wrap up, and I'll get the final thoughts as well from you. We had Mr. Kwesi talking about when there is a drugs issue on the table, the high-profile politicians should shut up and not to be talking. And in recent times, we've had a member of parliament with the opposition MPP now, Fojo, for instance, saying or giving what he calls exposés. And we've had people asking him to give evidence of what he's talking about. From where you sit, where would you say is that thin line between a tip-off, because from his perspective, he's giving you information, and what people may call misinformation?
He's not even at the level of the status of providing a tip-off that is professional. That's why I want to agree with our doyen Akrasi Sapong. Let the technocrats do their work unhindered. Because the gentleman member of parliament you referred to, regardless of any response that came from anywhere, he insisted. It's like, I'm not hearing anybody. You can say whatever you want to say, I'm not hearing anybody. Then he flips it around. It is your business to tell me whether or not. Meanwhile, our time is running. Let me tell you that from where I sit, when I was working in the UN office for West Africa, the Sahel, and we were traveling a lot because we had a UN plane. You know, we used to plug in our earphones where you sit. People think when a plane is flying, it is just the plane flying. Any communication amongst the plane and the airport is going to, others are listening. Communication between pilots, people are listening. You cannot just fly in a country and engage in mischievous activities and get away with it as it was described. That's why when you look at transorganized crime, for example, some of the flights that landed in Guinea-Bissau, they switch off radar. They land clandestinely.
If you can be landing on your points for us, so I can take final words.
Yeah, because you raised that question. I wanted to talk about how he did not even have any little expertise to even comment on the issue. And he made it so bad as a political issue. And that is, for me, totally unacceptable. But let me quickly do my conclusions and takeaways. One, I want to support our senior brother here. the idea of the database so that everybody can have a one-stop database of what is happening. It's not just because of the database. We need that database also to shame so that people can know that your name is on that list. Secondly, the conversation this evening points to the fact that the prosecution processes must have integrity. So that, as my good friend Amwa indicated, when you are accused, but you go through that due process, and the whole of Ghana knows that the system has integrity, and you are able to clear it, you can get your respect back. Yeah. But when you don't have a system that has integrity, you won't be able to do that. And finally, I see you are putting pressure on me.
I do apologize for that. Yes.
Okay, less than 1 minute. Because of the nature of transnational organized crime, you need to have an interlocking of different responses and approaches. For example, this evening we've not talked about how do you target the money that is laundered, money laundering. Because these people cannot channel the money through banks. So they carry a huge lot of cash. So when you see somebody with all these properties, but then the bank accounts do not reflect the wealth, we should go after that person.
But Iyoko is supposed to be doing that.
Who?
Iyoko. Is Iyoko not supposed to be doing
so
that?
it is part of so it is the interlocking of everybody involved. Yeah. So that we should be able to determine how did you build those properties when your bank accounts do not reflect that.
So we should start doing that?
Yes, we should start doing that.
Upon your final words.
Yeah, well, my view is that we need to reevaluate the metrics we use for gauging anti-crime success. It is not so much about how many arrests we make, or the quantity of drugs. We also need to move our emphasis to long-term strategies rather than short-term solutions. We busted this here. 6 months later, we bust this. Is there any interconnectivity? Yeah. Are the drugs that are being busted, are they connected to arms trade? Yeah. Are they connected to
a group of people?
Movement of people.
360 kind of perspective.
Perspective 4. And that, I believe, this information, if it gets to the presidency, the National Security Advisor, National Security Coordinator, Minister for Interior, need to put together a team, bipartisan team, just like we're talking, people who are well respected in the NPP and NDC, to re-evaluate these things.
Our approach
and look for long-term solutions.
In 30 seconds, Mr. Fokwama.
I think I would want to go with our senior people and say that NACOC has a lot of good professionals in there. And once we're giving a task, we're able and we'll be able to do it.
Thank you so much. And I would like to say thank you to you, Francis Opoku-Amoah, Acting Director, Public Affairs and International Relations with the Narcotics Control Commission. You just watched him give his final thought as well. Also, my immediate right, Mr. Kwesi Sapon, former NACOC boss. Thank you as well for joining us on Agenda. And of course, Mr. Emmanuel Bombande, former UN Senior Mediation Advisor and former Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister. Thank you all to you, gentlemen, for joining us on Agenda tonight. My name is Beatrice Adu. Join us again next week.